Well, lovely to see you here again for the second in this series of Seeing Through Clothes. Last week we looked at the way in which clothes echoed the position of women in society, and in fact the way in which the gendered body carried on into the way in which we saw the naked body. So today I'm going to look at the other side of the coin, so as to speak. We're going to look at the way in which men dressed and the development of male attire from the Ancien Régime through up until about the First World War. And the point that two points that I'm going to make is that the development, there is a move away from finery in men's clothes. Finery really was used to distinguish men and society according to status. In the second half of the 19th century, men's clothing is going to develop in a way that it defines them as a gender. It's no longer really related so much to status as to masculinity and a rejection of femininity, right? And this becomes the major preoccupation of male fashion. Now, if you think about what you wear, it really is like a second skin. You open the door and whatever falls out and you put on that morning really relates very much to your sense of your own personal identity. In the past it would have related to your political status. It certainly stands even now probably for your status in society. And it certainly, absolutely certainly relates to your gender. But we also don't realise how important the idea of the clothes that we put on are in talking or using the words about clothes symbolically for major political movements as well. This idea of clothes is so ingrained in the way in which we see ourselves and the way we think that I'd like to give you a few examples of this. The first one, of course, would be the French Revolution, which overthrows the Ancien Régime and which is a sort of a major watershed in politics in the early modern times. And the revolutionaries who take part in this movement call themselves the sans-culottes, right? Those who do not wear culotte being the short breeches being worn by the aristocrats. So the whole concept of freedom, liberty, democracy, fraternity is encapsulated in this idea of clothes. Of course, it doesn't extend. The fact that they've chosen the culotte is very important because, of course, who don't wear culotte? Women. So you have very much this idea. You can already see that women in many ways are going to be excluded from this movement towards democracy, right? We'll talk about this later, the way in which women were persecuted if they showed political leanings, even under Robespierre. Another example of this, I suppose, if you're moving much further towards times that we can relate to, would be in the 70s, the idea, is it the 70s? I think the burning of one's bra, right? You burnt your bra. I mean, what an extraordinary sort of thing. But in actual fact, it symbolised, of course, the getting rid of a piece of clothing which represented constraint and which also represented a throwing out of all of those attitudes which had been prevalent, had come back into fashion after the Second World War. We spoke about this last week, where women's body were highly gendered with the large bosom, the cinched waist, the large hips, the childbearing person. Of course, society now needed more citizens after they'd all been massacred on the fields of Europe. So very symbolic, but also we don't realise the way in which just the way we use language in every day also relates to clothes. I think I gave you the example last week of someone being highly strung, which of course related to having worn corsets correctly, and also this rather derogatory statements you make about, oh, she wears the pants or she wears the trousers. In other words, an unnatural woman, because of course women didn't wear trousers. It was only something which was a masculine prerogative. So I think this is a very important reflection. and it also sort of penetrates the world of art. The way in which we see a lot of these paintings in the 19th century relates very much to what people are or are not wearing. Last week we looked at Olympia, by the portrait by the painting by Manet, which caused such a scandal in the Salon of 1864. And this was carrying on from the even bigger scandal of the Salon of 1863, where Manet had produced the luncheon on the grass, which originally had been called le bain, or the bath, someone bathing, which is referring to someone bathing in the background. Now, exactly the same problems arose. First of all, before we go into that, you know what happened at the Salon of 1863. So many paintings were rejected that there was a major uprising amongst the artists themselves and even amongst the connoisseurs and the public, and a Salon des Refusés was set up, a salon of artwork which had been refused. And it was in this salon that the Déjeuner sur l'herbe appeared. Now again, people were extremely made derogatory remarks. Why? Well, the first one is the way in which it's painted. This is very much the same thing as for Olympia. The painter hasn't really got the vanishing points, if correct. If you actually look at it from the point of view of a Renaissance painting, you can't stand outside it and have the impression that you walk into it. Everything is slightly disconnected. She's too close, if in actual fact she is related to the size of these figures here. The painting is not finished. There isn't that wonderful sort of licked look that you used to get with Renaissance art, the shadows being correct. And in fact, you get large patches where you can see the paintbrush of the artist. So this was something which was seen as immoral in many ways. It meant that this man was not upholding the ideals of art which was supposed to speak to the better part of us. Same problems also with this confusion as to what was this painting. Is it a landscape? Well, no, because it's got a lot of figures in it. Is it a genre painting, a still life? Well, no, because there's too many figures. Is it a portrait? Well, it seems to be. However, it's really, maybe it has some kind of narrative or some uplifting story. In fact, it has none at all. In fact, Manet was going to great pains to show that it had no narrative. All right, he actually based his painting, as many of his paintings were based on works from the Renaissance or works from the past, because Manet was at pains to show that he respected and understood the painting of the past, the history of art, but he was doing something different. So he deliberately takes this motif. This is, of course, the river gods after Raphael, and here you see this character here, and exactly the same posture as you have here. All right, so he's doing something different. And the second last thing is, of course, this impudence of this woman. Now, is she a nude or is she naked? Well, he's gone to great pains to show that she's not a nude. She's not a classical nude. She is naked because you can see the clothes that she's just taken off. But, of course, again, a scandal. She's not a gendered body. She's a biological female body. You know, gender is, of course, this idea of something being socially constructed. It's not something natural. Right? We have a sex and we have a gender, and our gender is assigned to us by society. And she is not showing the small waist. In fact, she's got all these love handles. She's a bit lumpy. And not only that, she's not displaying any female characteristics, particularly those prized at that time. She is not submissive. She is looking back at the viewer. However, what really threw people in this painting was the juxtaposition of a nude with two men who were wearing contemporary clothes. This is despite Charles Baudelaire, the poet, sort of saying, you know, we must, in his great work, The Painting of Modern Art, we must learn how to be heroes in our frock coats and boots. And here, indeed, you have men lounging comfortably in these sort of rather slightly foppish outfits. And these, of course, were identifiable people, whereas she's naked and she's white. So you get this huge sort of contrast between the female and the gendered male, all right? And what I want to look at in this lecture is that the outfit that they are wearing will develop through the rest of the 19th century into the costume which men still wear today. Black as being the most important colour. In fact, Baudelaire and other poets said, what is wrong with this century? We all look as though we're in mourning. We're all in black. Now, black, of course, becomes the colour of the clergy, of the judges, of teachers, of politicians at the time, and particularly it's going to be the colour of the bourgeoisie. It shows renunciation, austerity, seriousness, respectability, hard work, all of these things which have totally the opposite of frivolity, all right? And there are a couple of times when men can indulge in frivolity in their costume from this tradition onwards, and we will look at that. Now, even today, the only men really who can step outside this costume situation of wearing a suit and it being in a dark colour it's probably the artistic community. Film directors or artists are allowed to do that. Otherwise, if you do dress in a frivolous or colourful manner, you run the risk of losing your gender and being possibly considered gay, which, of course, Australian society is probably a very difficult definition to be able to maintain. Right? This even goes down to the colours that the children wear. My little grandson, I gave him a pink tutu for his birthday, and my son had great difficulty in taking him to a barbecue with his Scotch mates. It was ridiculous. I mean, it's this ingrained idea, colours relate to gender. What are you doing to this poor kid? It is a colour, just amongst any. Leo hadn't learnt that it wasn't right. It's unmanly for a little boy to wear pink. So this is what I want to look at in this lecture. Where did we get to this stage, and how we have maintained this divide between the dark colours of male solemnity and the brighter colours of femininity. Well, I want to go to the back again to the Ancien Régime and to look at several points. Now, I'd look at Louis XIV. Just very quickly, Louis XIV in his coronation robes, Louis XV in his coronation robes, Louis XVI, you sort of think, good heavens, didn't they have anything else in their wardrobe? Of course, it was traditional wear, but the point I'm trying to make is that in the Ancien Régime, there was not this extraordinary change of fashion that you will witness from the middle of the 19th century onward in relation to the Industrial Revolution and also the department stores and the swiftness of modernity, the change. So you have really, in many ways, almost eternal styles. And I just want to show how little this has changed. This is a male courtier in 1755. In 1788, it's not particularly different. You will have a slight exaggeration of the silhouette, which in many ways is not an unfeminine silhouette. All right, you have it starting with smallish shoulders, going in at the waist, a longish coat, and a sort of a slightly vase situation. Now, the important thing for the aristocrats at the time was to show rank. One had to show one was as far as possible from the tiers-monde, right? This is the third, or the tiers-état, the third estate, all right? Remember, the only people who paid taxes before the revolution were the workers. The clergy and the aristocracy didn't pay taxes. So, and also these other people were seen as vaguely inhuman. So one wore these extraordinary costumes that, of course, the peasantry couldn't afford. They had their clothes were dyed with natural dyes, aniline dyes hadn't developed, so they were all in dark browns and khaki greys and so on. Whereas the aristocrats, of course, were in these exquisite costumes made of very, very expensive materials, spun silk, materials brought in from the East. All of these costumes showed immense number of man-hours that had been womenars that had been used to construct them. So the more elaborate your costume, the more important you were. All right. So this was this governments of appearances. Appearances were everything. You know, what you were as a person didn't matter. It was this exterior armour of appearance.
Are they culottes?
No, yes, they're culottes. Yes. So here you have also colours, of course, that we would consider now female colours. You know, the pale pink. There were pastels were sought after because, of course, they would get dirty, and therefore, if you had a beautiful pastel outfit, it meant that you'd changed or you'd recently acquired it. It meant you were even more wealthy than if you had a darker one. All right. Of course, this was used also to show the finesse of French luxury products. As you see, lace was used also extensively, and embroidery for men. I just wanted to show you, however, underneath these outfits, which finish at the knee, you have a very comfortable sort of set of underwear. Remember, we talked about last week the shirt, which had originated in the Middle Ages, had got shorter for men and got longer for women, so it becomes a kind of chemise for the women, and there it's a shirt. You have the waist is pulled in, as you can see, probably stiffened, not a corset, but stiffened, so it does define you. As you can see, you need that with that swallow shape, which is a very elegant shape. They would have had high heels as well to sort of make sure that that sway was continued. But also you actually get trousers which can be pulled down and with a fly as well. So there was no problem for men actually going to the toilet, right? Even at Versailles. And as you have to remember that Versailles was a disgusting, filthy place, there were no toilets. People sort of just went in corners and so on. So I just want to now get to, we spoke about Marie Antoinette last week, this idea of the importance of showing your rank by the amount of material and the amount of show. And eventually, Marie Antoinette, of course, leaves this customary costume that she has and becomes a fashionable woman and starts wearing clothes which are dictated by Paris, and so loses the cachet associated with being royal, this idea of, you know, tradition being everlasting. And once you come into the fashion and the change of times, you lose that ability to stand aside. So she becomes identified in many ways. They hate a number of things about her, but a woman who will do that is capable of anything. She's capable of incest. She's capable of being a nymphomaniac. All of these ridiculous things that she was accused of are really because of her clothing choices. And one of the reasons we have so little in the way of Marie Antoinette's wardrobe, which remains, is that when the mobs broke into the Tuileries Palace and massacred the Swiss guards, they didn't give a damn about the sort of gold ornaments and the beautiful Sèvres vases. What they went for was her wardrobe. And the rest of the day you would find her underwear. Women would be wearing the things on their head. They'd be any part of her wardrobe that they could get. It sort of symbolised her decadence. All right. So again, there's this importance of clothes at the time. Now, I have here an example of an aristocrat, Charles de Colonne, who was a member of the Parliament at the time, showing his sophistication here in a beautiful dark satin suit, wonderful cuffs, difficult to eat, difficult to keep clean, and so on. Now, one of the other essential aspects of dressing was that you had to show that you didn't have to work. And the tighter and more confining the clothes were, the more obvious it became that you were a person of ease. Aristocracy, of course, was defined by not working, because you had, all these serfs and people slaving away on large estates, bringing in your wealth. So this also had to be shown, right? So therefore, finery, stuff that you couldn't do anything except maybe write or maybe ride in, was essential to show who you were. Now, I just want to quickly look at the way in which what people wore on their heads. For Louis XIV, you still had, it's not natural hair, all right? This is what I look like when I get up in the morning. And it took 6 wigs to get him to look like that. Now, the hair that he would have there would have been taken from probably people from who died in the hospitals, or from trade in bodies. Don't forget, people weren't guillotined at this time, so therefore you didn't have quick access to heads, which you did later on. And hair, of course, one of the big trades at the time of the French Revolution was selling the hair. This goes away from majesty with these enormous wigs to, by the time of Louis XV, to a very small powdered wig. Now, everyone wore a wig at court, and this also took over in the bourgeoisie as well. Now, it might seem ridiculous to us, but in actual fact, it was a very practical arrangement at a time when people didn't wash. Right? You remember, you didn't wash your body. You actually had this underwear, this chemise, which you took off and washed occasionally. Really occasionally, cleanliness wasn't important at the time, so people often had lice in their hair, so it was much better to actually have your head totally shaved and to have a wig placed on it. Now, women, however, did wear their own hair, right? So we'll look at that in a moment. Now, what we have here is a typical face from the court of Marie Antoinette, which points to the problems that we have when we actually try and recreate, we have costume drama, because our sensitivities would not allow us to be able to recognize as male or female, or as serious or not serious, someone who was dressed and made up at the time of that. All right. Now, for example, the wig looks quite extraordinary. You would get no man wearing something like that. It now sort of represents being a bit of a pansy, or sort of paying too much attention to your grooming. These wigs also were often pale grey, maybe even pale pink, really never the colour of hair. And of course you get this with judges' wigs now. There's still that strange colour, where they're made out of horsehair. These people would have had these wigs made out of human hair. Women often actually took their own hair to use. Now, the face that you had to be as artificial as possible, all right? So this, again, is something that will be taken over only by women in the middle of the 19th century, all right? So this is the sort of contrast I want to make. The burden of artificiality and sort of difference from the natural state, here it's difference from the working class, changes from men to women. All right, so what we have here is the whole face has been whitened. This idea that, the peasants were out and had dark skin. Aristocrats, of course, had pale skin, but they would whiten all of their face with a mixture of mercury and lead. Now, this was, of course, a toxic mixture, and eventually it would burn into the skin, cause scarring, cause sort of abscesses to form. Women also used to have those very low décolleté tops, and they would also powder their breasts and draw blue veins as well, so that they looked as they had thin skin. Well, of course, eventually, after a couple of years of putting lead powder on you every day, they're all swollen and scabrous, and you actually get reports of the time talking about these women with their scabby bosoms. So people died very early deaths, often going deaf and going blind. This is if you survived smallpox and childbirth, so they probably didn't have time to get too bad looking. All right, now the other thing was that there was to be no facial hair, and this is the thing that's very important, that both men and women, well, women obviously, don't sport any facial hair. So there's not gendering. Do you see that? There's no reference to masculinity as we see it. You have a painted face, no whiskers, no moustache, and even the eyebrows of both gender were removed. So you took off your eyebrows and put mouse skins on instead. All right, so this, you can see the way these are very, very heavily accentuated. As the eyebrows have come back just recently now, I used to, for a couple of years ago, you had to have thin ones, now you have to have thick ones and so on. The eyes were outlined with kohl, but even more than that. What they haven't done here, because he would look too silly from our point of view, is the extraordinary amount of rouge. He'd look like a clown if the amount of rouge that a courtier had on was put on now. So they've just, in this modern representation of the past, they've just shown that he would be wearing rouge. Rouge was something which was a marker of aristocracy. When you was received at the court, you could paint. And it was vermilion, which was in a large triangle, which is really very much like the mime and the clowns, which take this over, and this is why, when they did this Marie Antoinette fiasco, they couldn't do that. The other thing is the mouth, which was only painted in the middle, all right, so that you had a small mouth, which was just like a little cupid's bow, and the side was eliminated. So it's a completely different looking mouth. One of the reasons is because you kept your mouth shut, mainly because of the smell and your rotten teeth. They did try and make false teeth, but not very successfully. All right, so there we have the male and female face, very, very similar. Now, of course, it wasn't easy to actually do this. Flour was pumped onto your wig. And finally, at a time of drought and famine, both in England and in France, there was a tax that Pitt brings in England against a wig tax. So people stopped powdering their wigs and started, leaving them the normal colour. And this is the origin also of this idea of Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake," because what it was so scandalous that she was using so much flour for herself. So here you have someone having a cone put over his head while the servant is dusting him. You see everyone at court, even the servants, wear wigs. All right, now we saw this last week, this idea of Marie Antoinette's hairdos, which was so extraordinary. So you do get women wearing very similar styles, shape, body, same kind of artificiality, but the females always have to push it a bit further. So this is where she wears these ridiculous, looks up what's happening today. Oh, it's, we've defeated the Armada. Look, I'll put a boat on. This was not a wig. All right, this is what I'm trying to show you today. Women use their own hair, which was whitened, powdered, often pale blue, pale pink, and pads of their own hair. For example, if you combed your hair, out of your hairbrush, would be kept and used for padding. So, and this would stay for weeks like this. They could probably take the boat off. But it was very difficult to sleep, as you can imagine, and so often on these, next to an aristocrat's bed, there'd be a little table with an indentation, and you'd sort of lie like that, sort of like perpetually being in cattle class on the way to Doha, really, I can imagine. So you probably needed a bit of paint to get the dark rings under your eyes out. Well, the revolution of 1789, of course, brings in this complete overthrowing, discrediting of the political system and all of the values that had maintained it, and particularly the destruction of the class system. And so you now get people, the revolutionaries, who weren't all simply working class people from the country. Many of the middle class people take place in that. They all wear this uniform, which is known as something which is not. It's the sans culotte. They don't call it a positive thing. It's a definite mark against something which had existed. All right, so it's the culotte, and of course this is what men wore, as you saw before. Now they adopt what will now become, we still have it, trousers. Right, this is the beginning of the first full-length trousers that will be worn in civil as well as military wear. Now, it wasn't just the culotte, which was symbolic in the colours, all of them in red, white and blue and red being the colours of Paris and white being the colours of the monarchy, because before actually the reign of terror, before they get rid of Louis the 16th, there is a moment when they think that they're going to be able to rule with a constitutional monarch. And so when he comes to the town hall, he puts his own white cockade, the Bourbon cockade, on the colours of the city of Paris. And that's where you get the red, white and blue coming from. All right, but there are two other symbolic aspects to this clothing. This is the carmagnole, this one here actually, which is a short red jacket, which comes out of Italy, because there were a lot of Italian migrants that came in through Marseille and come up to Paris at the time of the Revolution. But the main thing that people wear, and which is still shown on the statue of Marianne, who represents the Republic, is the Phrygian bonnet. Now, this was a bonnet which was a knitted cap which was worn by manumitted slaves in ancient Rome who'd been freed by their master. Some of them had also had the tops of their ears cut off, and so they either wore wigs or they wore these caps. And so it becomes the symbol of the new freed man. Okay, women wear it as well as men. So the dress of the revolutionary person was relatively similar. Women might not be wearing trousers, but they wore simple shifts, as we know. However, there is still within this revolutionary movement this idea of a hierarchy, and you have the Senate and you have the Council of 500. And of course, since this is a great republic, Jacques-Louis David designs costumes for this august board, who is sort of on the basis of the Roman Senate, you see, with the toga, however, with the colours of red, white and blue. So you're always going to get, even in these movements, people who sort of move away to become sort of dandies. Now, people are still clean shaven. Men are still, there is no moustache, there are no beards. Of course, this again referring to ancient Rome. It's very hard to find a bearded Roman emperor, with the exception of Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, and they were doing that because they wanted to look Greek. All of the Roman emperors are clean shaven. In fact, even Christ is clean shaven, whereas you'll notice that in popular images of Roman Catholicism, as you get towards the end of the century, Christ becomes more and more bearded. By the time he's got that picture of him with the lantern showing the way, he's got a massive beard. All right, so Jacques-Louis David shows the way of getting rid of wigs and having a haircut which is a la Titus, a Titus Roman haircut. So no makeup, no wigs, and no facial hair. Now, when Robespierre, after the terror ends, Robespierre takes over and the guillotine works night and day into places at the Hôtel de Ville and the Place de la Concorde. The reign of terror is finally overthrown by Tallien and so on, and there is extraordinary rejoicing. People have lived through a time when, not unlike the times in the Second World War, of occupation, when people were being denounced by their neighbours, you never knew when you were going to be safe. So at the end, when Robespierre finally gets to the guillotine, there is this outpouring of joy, a bit like after the First World War as well. So everything is thrown, all sort of customs are thrown aside. There is great sort of rejoicing, sexuality, ridiculous clothing and so on. And the 5 people who are elected to take over are the directors, this is Barras, who have already, if you see within that very quick time, gone back to the culotte style with court dress, which is very different from those rather outrageous dresses that the senators had, which were Roman style. All right, so they are, of course, with these turbans in red, white and blue, and getting back to this idea of finery. However, we will have a look at women's clothing at this time. You also get, at this time, a resurgence of the right wing or monarchists who start to come back from exile and are now in a superior position and form groups of thugs, whereas before you had the groups of sans-culottes going around beating people up. Now you've got this gilded youth who have come back and are going around beating people up. This is the way in which women are wearing. So you've got this ridiculous outfits now. You see they've gone back to the culotte. They've got sort of corsets back on. Their sort of chests are being puffed out. They've got extraordinary hairdos, extraordinary cravats and so on, whereas women are still wearing these very simple clothes of the referring to Greece and Rome. Now, these are the incroyables. So the women were called the wonderful ones, les merveilleuses, and the incroyables, the unbelievables, were these people. Now, they would walk around speaking their own language, lisping, and they eliminated any word that had R in it, because that's the R of the revolution. So it would be incroyable. So there's this extraordinary affectation of manner which is reflected in the affectation of clothing. So here we have this ridiculously large eye spy piece, so he's spying out people he can beat up. It's not because he can't see, it's symbolic. And here's the cudgel that he's going to be whacking into people, but at the same time he's exquisitely dressed. Look at the sort of the high heels, the culottes, the sort of a combination of Ancien Régime and Directoire styles. Now, these people would spend hours tying up 3 or 4 cravats. They'd have things with 4 or 5, I think I've actually got it in the next one, 3 or 4 lots of lapels, waistcoats, and so on. And of course the hair now has become extremely stylized, right? They're not powdering it, and they still are clean shaven, right? Now, you get dandies at each stage. Now, at this time of the Directoire and under the French Revolution, of course, you get the abolition of slavery. And at this time in Saint-Domingue, this particular man, Belay, is elected as a deputy. He will actually finally lead a slave uprising against Napoleon's sister when she is sent over to look after Saint-Domingue with her husband Leclerc. So here we have now the dandy outfit, right? At each time you will get men who refine and feminize that particular outfit. And so here you have him with these beautiful materials, very much like an incroyable, but much more elegant. Now, we have now the rise of Bonaparte, who comes back to become first consul in 1799, and then, of course, crowns himself as emperor. And if you want to look at the career of Napoleon, you have no better way of judging at what point he is at in this career than by what he's wearing. Here, he has just taken over as first consul in a kind of a coup d'etat of the 18 Brumaire. And is very keen to show that he's much more than a general. And so we have a painting here in a very austere environment. He's wearing a sword to show that, he can draw it, and this is where his power base is. However, he is an elegant, if soberly dressed, responsible man. So here he's pointing to one of his victories, the victory of Campo Formio, which will develop into the Peace of Amiens, which ends that warfare with England, which had been so ruinous to both of them. So this was a major diplomatic coup. So he's trying to show himself as a very stern and reliable person, and he does so having brought back the culotte, right, and this very, very sort of sober top. By the time he has crowned himself emperor, he has taken on the trappings, literally, of the Ancien Régime. Emperors could only be crowned if they had this paraphernalia which had been given to Clovis. This is the hand of justice, the globe of the world, and the sword of Charlemagne. So he will take these things on. However, because he's not a Bourbon, he can't use that wonderful blue coronation robe with the fleur-de-lis, so he has to have his own red one with the bees. However, he is now totally taken up by showing his power through his clothes. And I think this is gives you one of the very good examples of this, how from very simple styles, the first example of him is with flowing hair, he has now become very stylized, and the finery and the ostentation of the Ancien Regime has completely come back, as he has instituted extremely strong etiquette. Everyone has their own households. In fact, it was more Ancien Regime than the Ancien Regime, because he wants to be the next dynasty. And this is how he does it. So these extraordinarily fine clothes are brought back. Napoleon has totally lost the plot here with the hat and the lace. You will see here, I'll just show you carefully, this is what Josephine looked like 8 or 9 years earlier, still wearing that very graceful style of the directoire, the soft muslins and so on, theoretically with no corseting. However, it was there, I can tell you. Very non-powdered hair, very little makeup, and nothing in the way of footwear, and tights underneath. And that's the shawl you were talking about, I think, Jenny. Here, of course, the outfit has gradually become more stylized. All right, you still have the high waist, but you can see, of course, it has been pushed in to give her this sort of ledge and bosom. She has been covered over now with this Marie de Medici collar. This is now because Napoleon wants the clothing of the court to show the great style and the luxury goods that France is capable of manufacturing. And of course she's going to be used as a fashion horse to export these goods throughout the rest of the world. Now, as I said, at each stage you have the dandy, the person who is going to push those styles to an excess. And the dandy that we have at this stage is Joachim Murat, who is the wife of Caroline Bonaparte, Bonaparte's brother. He was the great general of cavalry, about 6'3", very good looking, not very intelligent, but this was good because it meant he couldn't quite figure out, he was going to get killed if he ran along ahead, and so he sort of always led the heavy cavalry. Now, he was known for his extraordinary good looks, and boy, does he know it. So he has a number of paintings of him with these extraordinary collars and cuffs and the curled hair, and we get the beginning of a facial hair being brought back. All right. I wanted to show you here this idea of the dandy, even going into war. The horse is covered in the most extraordinary outfit, and the horse looks rather pleased with itself as well. There's one wonderful piece that I read about the Battle of Waterloo, with Wellington having to command this cavalry of English gentlemen, and it was raining on the day of Waterloo, and they were most upset, and some of them were trying to go into battle as the cavalry with umbrellas up. I'm serious. It's an unbelievable story, this idea of how one looked as a gentleman. All right, so as you know, Napoleon goes into exile, and we have the return of the kings. So this then, Louis XVIII comes into power. He continues what Napoleon had done with the extraordinary etiquette of the court. However, we now get another development. Now, we've all heard of George Beau Brummel, who, at the time of the Regency period was a great friend of the Prince of Wales. Now, he is going to introduce a new style into distinctive clothing for people who are not in the military. And this is a style which is going to cross the channel into France, and is going to become identified with the dandy, and also in the middle of the 19th century with the flâneur, this particularly elegant man in the crowd, the flâneur such as Baudelaire and Manet. Now, Brummel, of course, would eschewed finery. All right, he is going to break away completely with that. He would dress often just in blacks and whites. He wanted to be inconspicuously conspicuous. All right. So the idea now was this aristocracy of taste, which was subtle and not obvious. So finery was no longer something which hit the eye, it was something that the connoisseur could appreciate. And so there was a whole philosophy of life that went with the dandy. he would of course spend years, well not years, hours and hours and hours just getting his necktie tied in the right position. He'd put champagne on his shoes. He would spend all his money, fortunes, on just that right length of cuff in the right type of material. And would be adored by the English aristocrats and by Prinny himself. Finally, he fell out with the Prince of Wales. He snubbed him. Prince of Wales snubbed him at a royal do. But Beau Brummel, through his aristocracy of sartorial taste, had sufficient power to be able to say to the person standing next to the Prince of Wales, "Who's your fat friend?" And still not have to go into exile, still be considered as the person who is the trendsetter in the latest fashions. He did eventually, of course, end up in France. He ran up great debts and died penniless. However, he is going to be a great influence in the development of men in black. But what he was reacting against were these people coming back from the Grand Tour, all right? In the 18th century, young aristocrats went off for 2 years to lose their childish ways and come back worthy of government, taking up their place in the House of Lords. So they had to go particularly to Rome and to Venice to make sure that they understood the lessons of fallen empires, because, of course, Great Britain was going to take on the mantle of ancient Rome, and it didn't want to fall into the decadence of and horrors and licentiousness of Venice or the Roman Catholic superstition of Rome. So they had to show that they managed to sort of escape these. Well, a lot of these people came back carrying rather not the kind of effects that people wanted. They came back looking like Italians, toted up in finery, and of course the plain Englishman is horrified. Is this what's happened to my son? Comes back mincing. And I think I told you in a lecture I had the other day that there was even a law passed in Parliament against mincing and excessive hand gestures. All right, so there was that. But they also brought back syphilis, which decimated the aristocratic ranks. So anyhow, Beau Brummel is reacting against this excessive show of stylishness, of rank via finery. All right, that's really what he's trying to do. It comes across to France, and so we get the beginning of men in black. Now, this idea of the dandy will continue on. When we were talking about the literary tour, we talked a lot about Montesquieu and his relationship to Proust. Now, I just want to look at the style of the Restoration period. It now goes back to a form which is almost a female form. In other words, you have cinched waists as being essential for men, and men are slight as well. The ideal of masculinity that we had possibly about 20 years ago was, the broad shoulders, hairy chest, and the gorilla aspect. Certainly wasn't something which was prized at this time. So people are sort of finely built, and if you're not finely built, well, you can look at with this male corset. All right. However, it's not as bad as the female corset. It's only strengthened here with stays, and it can be laced up from the front. You didn't need someone to pull at the back. Now, the whole point about corsetry is, and that figure, is to show your elegance and the fact that you can pay for these undergarments, which were very expensive before the Industrial Revolution. So shape here is talking about status, not so much about gender. Here we have these sort of caricatures of this man dressing. As we'll see, all of this is artificial, but it's very much like the body of a woman, where it's cinched in, the high heels, the bows, and so on. Here we have a dandy of 1880, and I think this is an interesting fashion plate as well, where you have men almost in a dress. All right, so you have the cinched-in waist with this coming out over the thighs, like clothes that are being worn today. And I think this is also quite interesting to notice that there's actually a bit of male bonding going on. He's actually got his arm round him, and they're holding hands. I mean, this is really quite interesting. It's something that you won't see later on in fashion plates. All right, so this then is the style of the 1830s, and I just want to show you how it's achieved. We're now getting male corsets that are becoming more and more extreme. Now, this, of course, is how one had to dress to actually look the part. If your shoulders weren't the right shape where you had padding, you were laced up by your people, you then have to go out at the hips, and so they actually have hip padders. All right, and then you come down, and can you see here, because you can see men's what they call calves, you have to look masculine. You have to have muscles in your calves. Anyway, so you have calf enhancers as well. So men getting dressed, also fashionably dressed, was almost as difficult as it was for women. And getting undressed, you'd be almost as dismayed, wouldn't you, when you finally see this handsome character? It all falls on the floor. I mean, it's probably too late to actually sort of say, well, thanks, but no thanks. All right, I just wanted to look at female clothing. This is Queen Amalia, the wife of the Queen. She has the same largish shoulders, the cinched waist, and the skirt, which goes out on the same angle. The only difference is that it's longer, and she probably doesn't have to wear calf enhancers. All right, this is a dandy of the time. You can see the cinched-in waist, and again, this is, of course, showing that you have leisure, that you can't really move very much, and that people have spent a lot of time getting you up. And waistcoats are the only sort of frivolity that you have. Well, we now get into the Second Empire, and this, as you can imagine, is going to be a really important time in this gendering of male and female outfits. Right? It's going to work according to these new ideas that have been discovered about what women are like and what men are like, based very much on the Industrial Revolution, where you start to have men moving away from the home to work. It's the end of the aristocracy and so on. So you get women at home and men outside the home. Now this, of course, is Napoleon III in his coronation outfit, and he clearly has a corset on here, which wasn't used in general by the middle classes. So we have now this with the new city of Paris. Sort of the class structure is very defined with the rise of these middle classes. The workers have been pushed to the outside. So clothing is much more at this time concerned with defining gender. The bourgeoisie has taken over, and the bourgeoisie are people who are hardworking, who are serious, who are ascetic, who are not frivolous, and above all are not feminine. Because at this time, as we talked about last week, femininity had now been defined in opposition to masculinity, right? There were very little things in common. The doctrine of the separate spheres, men work in the outside world, they are courageous, they're strong, they're intelligent, they're willful, they have great inventiveness, whereas women are, emotional, feeble-minded, hysterical, physically weak, and need protection. And this idea had even been starting with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And so clothing is going to emphasize these two separate spheres, where you have the men doing things and women feeling things, right? Emotion as against actions. And so we're going to see the central world of men taken over by black, and the colours are going to be all pushed over to the women, right, who now represent the status of men. They're like sort of flowers or butterflies against this black screen. And in fact, people at the time actually said, we men are nothing else except simply a black screen against which our women are shown up. So you're going to see this is going to be something which is customary everywhere, the dark seriousness of the men in black, and the suit also, which is going to develop. And white, of course, the colour for women. Now, the two things that happen here is that men's silhouette flattens out, all right? It goes away from the wasted shape that we saw in the Restoration and even at the time of the Directoire, and men adopt black as a uniform, signifying so many things. And of course it is still like that today, all right? Men who want to appear serious, they don't go out, at a big business meeting in a pink suit, all right? All right, now where does this black come from? We spoke last week about the importance of the Spanish court in relation to women's corsets. Remember, in the 17th century, we have the iron corset being brought in for the aristocracy, this idea of uprightness being something which the moral status of uprightness comes from the physical situation. But you also have, we go back to the court of Philip II of Spain. This is at the time of the Inquisition. Now, he adopted black as opposed to the finery of the Spanish court for many reasons. Firstly, because he was in mourning for his second wife, Elizabeth of Valois. Also because he was defining and strengthening the idea of the court against the the lords who had the great properties in the provinces. So in other words, he was an urban monarch as well, but above all, he associates it with the power of religion. Right now, of course, it is the Dominicans who are going to be leading the Inquisition, and of course they are these men in black. Now, added to this, Philip II was very superstitious and believed in astrology, and his the planet that he identified with was the planet of melancholy, which is Saturn, and wearing black was supposed to draw down the powers of these planetary influences. So from very sort of strict religious and superstitious reasons, he will wear black. And he is camped secretively sort of inside the Escorial Palace. All the courtiers wear black. And so it becomes the kind of priest policeman in many ways who's going to supervise the auto da fe. It becomes the colour of power, secrecy, and it is exported throughout Europe, right? Now, it is ironic. This is this wonderful painting of an unknown man with his hand on his heart with the white ruff simply highlighting his face. It's ironic that the power, the colour of extreme Catholicism, the colour of anxiety and atrocity should also be taken up by the Dutch, who are, of course, Protestants. Now, the Dutch were beleaguered by the Catholic League, particularly by Spain, and so take on this colour, this uniform of black, as this sense of nationalism, of being beleaguered, of having to stand against the world. And of course, they were bourgeoisie, like the people we're going to be looking at in the 19th century in France. Now, black, of course, is the colour of Protestantism. You get Luther, who was an Augustinian, who would be wearing black. He was a melancholic person. Calvin, of course, a lawyer, who also preaches with Protestantism the doctrine of predestination. There is really nothing one can do except wait for the final judgment. And so black is the colour of renunciation, of stoicism as well. So all of these ideals come into this colour black. It's also the colour which was worn by the Venetian noblemen. Now, there were laws, some sumptuary laws against wearing colours. And so if you ever look at any of Canaletto's Veduta, people are always shown in black costumes, had the black masks and so on. So when you look at 19th century art, you are going to see in men's costumes all of these ideas being channeled. Stoicism, sort of not secrecy, but power, assertiveness, seriousness, hard work, very different from the finery that we saw under the Ancien Régime. And black is not going to be a colour which is worn by women except in mourning. So from now on, you're going to see these paintings. Here we have one by Degas at the Stock Exchange. I thought it was a good example of nothing but black costumes here. Here we have this sort of secret pact which is going on, this idea of the absence of colour, which is what black is. Now, you're going to see, if black is the colour of men, you're going to see the opposite non-colour, white, being used a lot with women. Now, white wasn't originally the colour of virginity at all. It only becomes that in the 19th century. Originally, with Bernard de Clairvaux, with the Cistercians, white was the colour of joy. People wore it on joyous ceremonies, which is why people started wearing it for weddings. But it was only associated later when virginity became so important in the 19th century. And so you see in so much of the art, you're going to see men in black, as you can see here. We'll talk about their clothing in a minute. And these little women, albeit ballerinas, in the white tutus. Now, there's something slightly sinister about this. They're sort of not exactly spidery figures, but the sort of black taking over the white. This old fellow here has managed to, despite his age, has got 2 little girls, and every respectable bourgeois, of course, had a dancer, all right? And so even nowadays, if someone sort of got a bit of excessive spending, you know, how come he spent that much? Oh, il a une danseuse. He must have a dancer. It's known as having a little bit on the side. All right. So here we have these little girls against the black background. Now, women, of course, take on this idea of the superior morality, the purity and the virtuous nature of women in the home. All right, they had to prove how virtuous they were, and so all of these paintings that we saw last week show women in white. All right, now white was de rigueur in the morning. This is emphasized in so many of these paintings by the Impressionists. They actually want to use white because it exemplifies how a colour which seems totally unified can actually be shown as in different shades according to the light under which it is shown. However, it does show, if you look at Impressionist art from the point of view of fashion, you would see the huge number of white clothes. The other thing that you do notice, and I haven't actually spoken about here, is the use of dyes, aniline dyes, but which doesn't relate to men, but does to women. The evening ball gown, of course, had to be white, and we spoke about this last week with Worth, the great dress designer, who was capable of having every woman at the ball who had to have a Worth to keep up with the neighbours, but had to have it in white. He manages to make a completely different white dress for each of them. And here we have the sloping shoulders, which of course are so important. Now, if you didn't have sloping shoulders, you could get them, you see, because when you have you pulled right back and down by your corset. The only elements of the body which are fashionable are elements which can be fashioned, right? Do you see what I mean? And then by conforming to this, you show that you accept society's rules and abide by them. All right, there's no, if a big fat nose is something you can't do much about, but your posture, your shape, you can do something about your head, you can do something about your makeup, you can do something about your shape, you can do something about your height. And so all of these are things that are going to be markers of your self-respect. So here we have the fashion plate of 1868, which is beginning to look remarkably modern from the point of view of the tuxedo that we have today. Now, we get to this exemplary painting by Caillebotte. Paris on a rainy day. Some of you have been there with me. Probably it was raining, if I remember that. Yeah. All right, now what you have here, what he is emphasising is a kind of criticism of this new Paris of Haussmann. He's emphasising the uniformity of the city, right? It's these buildings all seem the same. We've got the balcony on the same, on the second and on the fourth. You've got them coming, almost this aggression of Haussmannian architecture. Now, the street also looks a rather hostile, damp place. But in it, you have a series of people who look as though they have been cloned. And they're practically all men. They're all wearing black. So, in other words, what you now have is a sort of uniform that would be used by the bourgeoisie. Now this man here has developed part of this uniform. The redingot, which we saw, that elegant coat that came in at the waist and went down long, had been developed from the riding coat, which is how you get a redingot. There was this sort of Anglo-mania for certain aspects of Brummel's clothing. So that redingot, which actually comes in at the waist and goes out, has been left aside, and you're now getting a coat, which is the cabas, which men wear all the time, which is really starts at the shoulders and just goes down to a little bit below the knee. Now this is a kind of tubular shape. So in other words, men take on, and remember this is a time when you now are getting with women excessive tight lacing, extraordinary petticoats either at the side or out the back, so you're getting this very curved feminine shape. The male shape has gone as far from that as possible and is espousing a geometric shape. All right, so if you start at the top, you have this kind of stovepipe thing at the top, which goes down into a kind of stovepipe shape here, and then followed down by two more geometric pillars at the bottom. All right, quite different from the female clothing. All right, now this fellow's a bit of a dandy because he sort of carelessly left it unbuttoned. He looks as though he wants to sort of move off. And it's also seen as a place where the city is a place where strange encounters take place. This fellow is going to sort of bash into them. These people aren't looking as well where they're going, and they're all made to look the same by this use of the umbrellas. All right, it looks like so many Martians who've just embarked in Paris. So this then is exactly what I was saying. Not unlike clothing that you can get at Zara today, quite frankly. If you go in, there will be a coat just a bit shorter in exactly the same style. The clothing that we have now are again these very narrow.
All the men are wearing hair on their face.
Yes, I'll get to that. Hair is definitely coming back. That's something I want to look at in a moment. Heels to lengthen the leg. And why do you want to lengthen the leg? Because you want to lengthen that geometric sense of the line, the straight line, probity, the uprightness, none of this frivolous bits on the side. It's all in that central block, you can rely on me aspect, the incredible seriousness of the bourgeoisie, people who are self-made men who are ascetic and stoical. All right, I just wanted to show you some pictures, photographs of these cartes de visite that Desdairy would have distributed. So here you have this coat that I was talking about before. Now, when you look at these paintings now, when you're looking at the Impressionists, you'll see that we have two different styles. We've got the style of the suit, which is being exhibited here by Bazzi. The rest of them are in these cabas coats. Now, the man in the centre is, of course, Edouard Manet, who stands out there because he is the leader of the Batignolles group, but also he incarnates also this group of men also just on the side, the people who take certain aspects of fashion and exaggerate them, in other words, the dandy. And Manet was known to be a dandy. I'll show you his picture in a moment. Here we have Caillebotte painting another dandy, or a flâneur, a man now who moves endlessly throughout the city, gazing at representations that he will put on in paintings, writing aspects and so on. Here is Manet. Now Manet was known for his wit and his charm and his totally irascible personality. He would fight duels with people over their ideas. But he is wearing these camel trousers and camel gloves. In fact, everyone wore camel gloves during the day, but he is sort of adding that little bit of extra individuality to it, which sort of matched his beard. Now, I want to look at Chateaubriand. This idea of the dandy has continued on. This was back in 1808. Remember that we saw that the fellow who was the senator from Saint-Domingue. At each stage you get people showing off their style and sort of not refusal of the canon of dress, but giving it that individual touch. Now, there are several times when men could actually let their hair down, so as to speak, and one was in the morning when they were in their equivalent of a dressing gown. Remember last week we saw people with the peignoir on? Now, this was Pozzi, who was a great gynecologist, who was a great society figure at the time, who is actually sort of playing rather with this painting. He's got a beautiful red dressing gown, which is of course the absolute antithesis of black, all right, and he's playing here with the idea that of course it was a cardinal red, so he's looking a bit sort of spicy, and there's a play on religion, and he's also playing with this almost sort of undoing his, you know, his dressing gown to sort of show the shirt that he has underneath. Now, unfortunately, he came to a sticky end. He was murdered by one of his patients. Very interesting man, if you want to look him up. These were the trousers that were the underpants that would have been worn at the time. You either have a fly with buttons, or you actually had a fly which came out on a flap. Now, this has moved a long way away from the kind of codpiece that people used to have in the Middle Ages and so on, which was supposed to have eventuated because people had syphilis, and they used to have sort of things around them to sort of, you know, calm the itching and all the rest of it. That's what I've been told. There was a lot of syphilis around at the time, but there didn't seem to be any codpieces. All right, now I want to now look at accessories. We now have different types of hats that you could wear. And in particular, you're going to have these stovepipe hats, and I'm going to talk about these ones and this bowler. All right, in all of Tissot's, Bell's paintings, again, men in black with their hats on. Now, men wore their hats all the time when they were in a public space. This meant that when they were in a department store or when they were at the opera, as you saw with those little ballerinas, they kept their hats on. Here we have Bell himself. You couldn't actually sort of be seen as a respectable man, a respectable bourgeois, without a hat like this. And of course the working class begin to develop hats that aren't quite as difficult to wear, but there's always this aping. Now, of course, they were originally extremely difficult. They were made of silk and very, very expensive, and also difficult to keep on your head. And so in many ways, this top hat, which is such a ridiculous shape when you think of it, it doesn't actually shade your face. It doesn't do anything at all. It just shows your status. And because you can't move your head, it actually shows that you are not indulged in physical labour. All right, so it means that these bourgeois are people who work with money, with their minds, in big affairs. They're not going to degenerate into having to wear practical headgear. Eventually, the 1850s, taking them to the opera was was difficult, so they developed a collapsible hat as well. For people who are a little bit further down the pecking order, you have the bowler hat. Now, this is another painting by Caillebotte. This character clearly doesn't have the body language of a respectable bourgeois. He's not lounging in the right position, you know, the hands in the pockets. His bowler hat's probably too far on the back of his head. Here you've got different hats which are hung up there. So this is probably more for the lower bourgeoisie. If you wanted to show, however, that you did have leisure, all right, because the bourgeoisie wanted to ape the aristocracy. And what is the essence of aristocracy? It's leisure. Leisure to indulge in sport, all right, which is becoming more and more important. So we now have a special outfit that you could wear when you went on these sporting weekends. And here you have this famous boatman's lunch, which you can mine for absolutely every aspect of French society, quite frankly. And of course here you have, this is actually Caillebotte himself in a boater, and we have a kind of straw boater over here as well. And they're in these singlets showing that they were yachtsmen. So this was an extremely, oarsman, a very prestigious kind of outfit to be in. To us now it looks less like they're sort of, you know, some kind of, you know, Sparky who's on his day off. Whereas this wouldn't have been seen like that at all. Now, I want to now get to facial hair, all right? Now, one of the things that's differences between men and women is that women don't, theoretically, grow facial hair. all right? And in fact, it's even used against women. It's shown that the women's inferiority, that they haven't got facial hair, and so they have to be kept inside, because if you have facial hair, it filters out the dust and it filters out the miasmas as well. So therefore, lack of facial hair is proof, if you ever wanted it, of women's frailty and the need to maintain them in confined spaces. Right? Meanwhile, men now emphasize facial hair because they want to be as unfeminine. Who wants to be hysterical, emotional, stupid, and all the rest of it? No, your physical appearance has to show these manly attributes, and so facial hair becomes emphasized. And here you have Napoleon III with his extraordinary goatee and his waxed moustache. When he ever went to any kind of event, he'd pick out which women he wanted, and one of them would sort of say he laboured long and hard to the extent that even the wax on his moustache melted. All right, so here we have moustache wax. All right, a patented substance for strengthening and training the moustache of all sorts and various conditions of men of any length of time and position. Do not be fooled by inferior substitutes. And it is the choice of the respectable gentleman and favoured by the elite connoisseur. So if you're ever going to grow a moustache, this is the way to go, the handlebar moustache. Now, of course, this made life difficult when you are drinking tea. So you would have special cups designed which would strain, you would rest your moustache there and drink through here. This, of course, is an English teacup, but how do you know? Yeah, tea, milk, yeah, milk. Yes, no European uses milk. I wanted to actually look at the development of facial hair in some of these Impressionist paintings. So in 67 we have Renoir sporting the kind of thing that people are wearing now, which is a kind of a goatee and a moustache. By a few years later, how many years later is that? 12 years later, facial hair has become even more prominent. So you're getting the full beard and a very, very large handlebar moustache. It's no longer just that little tweeted thing that we saw at the end. And Singer's portrait of Manet in 1889 shows real emphasis on facial hair. This is almost the Ned Kelly beard. It's large, uncombed, and it's emphasised by the fact that his hair is cut very short. Because let's face it, everyone has hair. Even women can grow hair. What women can't grow is a full beard. So this is this affirmation of difference as much as possible. And here, as you see in these Desderi carte de visite, men with these extraordinary beards, which absolutely dominate their face, and this really rather silly sort of hat that they have on. Now, there were a few other times when men could wear outfits that weren't black. This is when you started to go to the beach. All right? Now, going to the seaside is something which really develops in the 19th century, from the Second Empire onwards, with the Pereire Bank opening up Bordeaux and so on. And of course now only the wealthy can afford to do this. So again, it's a sign of leisure, and this is going to be the beginning, not actually till later, probably in the 20th century, when the tan starts to be important, because it's the sign of people who can afford to go on holidays. No one else had the time to go on holidays. You only had 1 day a week off if you were a workman. So wearing this was shown that you had a leisure time. And you have now the development of sport, and it is almost all men, of course, who take part in sport. Women in the 1870s, of course, couldn't do this with their corsets, and they weren't supposed to be able to move freely. That was something that the working class did, and it was sort of very unfeminine to be sort of sweating or taking good big steps. So we have the development then of muscle building, and I thought it was quite interesting to look at this painting again by Caillebotte of the male body, which is of course an extremely gendered male figure. If you'd seen a naked male, up until now, it would have been a Greco-Roman one, which looks quite different. Here you have someone who is very muscular, all right? He's turned his back on us, so we can't see his genitalia. If you stare with a telescope, you probably can. But it's the idea is this broad shoulders, and the emphasis is not on his sex, but on his gender, which is muscular now, all right? And unartificial, all right? There's no padding or anything, and this is this man getting out of his bath. There have been a huge number of treatises written on the fact whether Caillebotte was gay or not, which completely is irrelevant to this story. But it's interesting that he's turned the whole nude thing around. So we now have men indulging in sporting activities, which of course used to be just the realm of the aristocracy, who only had the right to hunt on their own land or to ride on their own land. Now you have the democratisation of riding clubs, and anyone now can go out and murder animals. All right, now what you actually have at the end of the 19th century is a movement which is called muscular Christianity, which starts out of the hygienist movement, which starts really in the 1850s, where you get this interest in the city as having to have light and movement of air, and then of course with the development of germ theory, all of these things become very important. You also get the development of worries about hereditary syphilis, alcoholism, health, gynecology. All of these things become the focus of attention, and doctors rise in the social ranks. And so you get the development of this idea of a sound mind in a sound body, which had been around since the Romans. But it begins more or less with the British in the private schools. And if you think of Tom Brown's School Days and Kingsley's work, there was this idea that the body should be trained. It was a very Protestant idea that you sort of mastered your body, and by mastering the body you mastered your impulses, and then you were a person who was worthy to rule and to rule other women, and of course those other little people in other continents further away. And so the idea was that, you know, you went abroad with a Bible in your hand and a sword in your hand. And this also, it was taken up by the Americans, and in fact the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, takes this up. And in fact you still get people who actually pray before baseball games and things. In fact, baseball and basketball, I found, were organised by the YMCA. And there was this idea of organised sport being, you know, incredibly important, and that it was almost a spiritual exercise. Excuse me, heavy irony used there, but anyway. So you now get then this extremely gendered male body. You couldn't get it much further. Facial hair, emphasis on the muscles, even very large fig leaf, as we will see. And I don't know what the rabbit's doing there in the background, but if it is a rabbit or not. Now, I want now to go to the present day and look at two aspects of male gendering that I think have come out of this, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. At a time now where women are asserting themselves in society. There's an awfully long way to go, but most women work. Women are now outnumbering men in universities, in many of the most important professions, but they aren't outnumbering men on the football field, even though they do try and make women play, you know, football. It just hasn't taken off. And so what you're actually getting amongst these footballers is this extreme gendering. And I think he's possibly the best example of this, you know, the swaggering emphasis on the muscles. And if you didn't get the muscles, you've got the tattoos which bring them out. If you don't just look at the limbs, well, you look at the decoration, the finery, they're almost dandies in many ways. Do you understand? But also the incredible return of facial hair. And it was a couple of years ago, it was scruffy, then it got to the little beard, then it's the beard, and now it's this. All right, so there's again this differentiation between women and men. And my theory, this is just my theory, is that these footballers are the last gasp of an outmoded form of masculinity. Well, I am hoping that my theory is right. I have to be careful because it's being recorded. So anyway, if you actually look, if you go back to the days of ancient Rome, you have the Colosseum, and of course you have the gladiators who come in, who are chosen to go in and do individual, at least, combat. And what were they fighting? It was at a time when Romans were no longer actually fighting their own battles. They had mercenaries to do it, but there was this kind of, the gladiators in many ways were a kind of safety mechanism where you could go and see violence, but it was all quite sort of went according to rules. If you look at a football match now, you have, is he going, our warriors are going in. Will he be able to? It's unbelievable stuff. I mean, people really should be working on THDs on this. You then get the people going into the football field, which is like a Colosseum, and they come up the ramp exactly the way the gladiators did, and they go out and indulge basically, okay, they might be skilled with the ball, but they do behave in a very antisocial way, hitting, kicking, pushing each other, which they really, if they did that on a footpath, they'd be up for grievous bodily harm. But it's okay because it's seen as this sort of social outlet. And so I think it's no just chance that you get these men exhibiting these extraordinarily masculine characteristics. However, there is hope. He has been voted. Well, he has been voted the sexiest man in the world, and the why is this? He is wearing what? Totally in black, and he's totally in black. All right, he's channeling probably all of those aspects that we have been talking about, the seriousness, but here is the sophistication of black. It's a denial of all of the finery, but it's also a denial of sort of masculinity related to sort of bodily masculinity. His charm comes from his urbanity and the understated nature of his persona, all right? The fact that he accepts society the way it is, but he's going to slightly overturn it. So in many ways, he is a dandy of the modern era. So I thought I'd leave you with this image because it'd be a bit depressing going away with pictures of Buddy Holly. All right, thank you very much.